During the spring of 2013, southern Alberta was hit with one of Canada's most expensive natural disasters. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, a podcast now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. All right, here we go. Hold on now. This was the 2013 Alberta flooding and mudslides. On this day in weather history. It was the worst flooding to hit the city of Calgary since 1932. Spring flooding is far from unusual. First, you have a seasonal change from winter to spring, where the snow turns to rain when it falls. But when you have unusually heavy rain on the already melting snowpack, then you escalate the potential for disaster by factoring in again now the unique topography of the region, that being, of course, the steep rocky terrain of the Rocky Mountains. This all adds up to rapid and intense flooding in southern Alberta and the foothills. Here's how the events of 2013 played out. It started on June 19th. A powerful deep area of low pressure brought torrential rain over southern Alberta. Now further west and higher up in elevation through those Canadian Rockies, instead of the precipitation falling as snow, where the terrain could easily soak it up, it fell as rain, heavy rain. Now, because the ground is, first of all, rocky, hence Rocky Mountains, but also B, frozen, to this point it could not saturate the excessive moisture, so instead it began coursing through the streams and rivers. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, but oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. June 20th. More than a dozen different communities that spanned from north of Calgary and then south to Lethbridge and west to the Rocky Mountain Parks declared states of emergency. High River and Canmore are among those who were the worst hit by the flooding. From this, mudslides caused part of the Trans-Canada Highway that ran through Banff National Park to be closed. As the waters now began rushing toward the city of Calgary, they issued a flood warning. They activated the municipal emergency plan and they declared a local state of emergency and gave an evacuation notice for communities at risk. Temporary flood barriers were built at many locations throughout the city. However, despite all of these proactive measures, the river spilled over its banks at the Elbow and Bow Rivers. June 21st, evacuations in Calgary shift into high gear as the Bow and Elbow Rivers continue to rise. Between 75,000 and 80,000 are forced to flee the rising rivers. Now, water is seeping into the Saddle Dome, and that is, of course, the home to the Calgary Flames of the NHL, who said everything below the 8th row of the Saddle Dome by the time it had all been said and done was a complete write-off. You've probably seen the images that were taken where you can see the most expensive seats completely submerged in what was a pool of water. The floodwaters would also swamp the grounds of the famed Calgary Stampede. Still on the 21st, the town of Medicine Hat declares a state of emergency as downstream communities brace for their own round of flooding. On June 23rd, it was over. About 65,000 Calgary residents are now given the all-clear to return home, even as cleanup efforts continue. Sadly, 5 lives in total were lost, and there was as much as $6 billion in financial losses and property damage across southern Alberta. The lasting aerial images of one of Canada's largest, most beautiful, most populous cities flooded underneath deep, muddy water are images that will last forever for those who lived through it and for those who covered it. And it started on June 19th, 2013, this day in weather history. Tomorrow is June 20th. Normally this is earmarked for Father's Day in many countries, a time for, kicking back with Dad, maybe enjoying outdoor recreations like fishing perhaps. Sounds peaceful, sounds idyllic, doesn't it? But on June 20th, 1959, a fishing fleet off the coast of New Brunswick, Canada, did not have a peaceful time, nor did they enjoy idyllic conditions. The June 20th, 1959 New Brunswick fishing fleet disaster. On this day in weather history, with me, your host, Chris May.